The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
I've got a ton of miles to cover. I know that's the incorrect measurement, but I've got a lot to cover today and not a lot of time to cover it in. Some of this is going to be fleshed out in video format, so be sure to check out the videos on youtube.com/The Benjamin Dixon Show. And also, I just released a video for our patrons every day, at least 4 days a week. I give a behind-the-scenes kind of impromptu analysis of an issue. In today's issue, I discuss with patrons on why for 2020, we need a litmus test, a no war with Iran litmus test, not just because of the moral arguments, but because of the really good political arguments against letting Donald Trump head a war with Iran. So be sure to go to patreon.com/the BPD show, become a patron and get access to that. I don't know where I want to start today, but let's start with this student from Harvard University who has had his admission rescinded. Kyle-kashuv. That's how I'm going to pronounce it, because kashuv, whatever. He is a young man who went to Parkland High School, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. Used to live like 10 minutes away from that school, so I know it well. Actually attended a couple of mathletes competitions there, but that's irrelevant. So this guy is a survivor of the shooting that happened last February. And he is a pro-gun advocate. So while David Hogg and the rest of Emma Gonzalez and the rest of the Parkland shooting survivors who came out and started March for Our Lives, while they came out against guns, came out against, or at a minimum, they came out against assault rifles, the AR-15. Kyle was the pro-gun reactionary to the shooting in Parkland. Well, turns out he had a rather interesting past with regards to the N-word. And there was a post that he made online that basically was not the questionable, not the one that white people like to kind of debate. Can we say the N-word in rap? Can we say nigga? With the A, it's got an A on it. It's not, it's just rap. Not that one. No, he went with the hard ER and spelled it out so many times till he finally got the spelling right. And he even joked about it. He said, see, I'm getting good at it now. And of course, that post came to light. And, it is what it is. When you are in the limelight, your past will get scrutinized. Your past will get scrutinized, and people will check your present. I've got plenty of reasons not to get too famous. But the fact of the matter is he had this in his past, and Harvard got a hold of it. And I'm quite sure the way they got a hold of it is that some people who didn't like him sent it to Harvard. And Harvard has released their decision today to rescind his acceptance into the class of 2023 from Harvard University. And he's, of course, online, saying, upset about it. And, he's going to be upset about it. He's obviously now been taken up by the I call them all the alt-right, man. I don't care. The intellectual dark web, they are the gateway to the alt-right. So for me, you're one and the same. But he's been picked up by the ben-shapiros of the world, and has been picked up by Dave Rubin. And I'm sure today their shows are going to focus on that as well. But, here's the thing. There's really literally nothing they can say to justify or to argue that Harvard had to accept him. I've seen a lot about forgiveness today from these people. And here is I guess he's 18 now, who at 16 years old found it in himself to be a bigot enough to go on a N-word rant. And sure, people can forgive him, but that doesn't mean that they have to extend to him the luxury of going to Harvard University. they don't. I mean, it's not Harvard. You can't force Harvard University to accept this guy based on his past. So, even if he asks for forgiveness, that's fine. We accept they accept your apology, but it's a convenient, it's you're not upset. You're not asking for forgiveness because of how wrong you were. You're asking for forgiveness because you got caught. I mean, that's just how this thing works, right? And that's for anybody, for anything that you do. Most of the time, people don't ask for forgiveness because they did something wrong. They ask for forgiveness because they get caught. Good or bad. I mean, for all of us, left, right, center, whether we're talking about our past with bigotry or whether we're talking about whatever. Hell, I've got, I used to be homophobic. And I'm thankfully, I was not online before I had a chance to grow up all the way. I mean, that's if there's anything about this story that's unfortunate, it's the fact that our kids are living their lives online and they're being extremely stupid online before they get a chance to actually mature into adults. But the problem is some of the trajectory that they are on tells us that they're not going to grow up into mature adults. They're going to grow up into be assholes. All right, that's a little tangent. But I want to get back to the arguments that they're making about this guy and in support of this guy. They're saying that, he asked for forgiveness and we should forgive him. That's fine, but we're not a forgiving society. We're not, as Adam Seward from the Nation, I quote him a lot because he's a pretty good thinker. I really like the way he thinks. But he was pointing out that all you people who made excuses to justify the murder of 12-year-old Tamir Rice by Cleveland, Ohio Police Department, this officer who flew onto the scene and within 2 seconds shot Tamir Rice. You all made excuses to justify that murder, and you're now asking for forgiveness for a 16-year-old? When you didn't, when you had no mercy, no empathy whatsoever for the 12-year-old, you vilified the 12-year-old? See, you're selective. You're extremely selective in the forgiveness that you want to offer. You want us to offer forgiveness to you. I mean, that's what powerful people always do. That's what entrenched power always does. Forgiveness for us and no mercy for you. That was one argument. The other argument is, free speech, free speech. Yeah, he had every right to say what he wanted to say, but at the same time, Kyle, you have to be held accountable for your words. That's the part of free speech that the right does not like. That there's accountability for every word that you say. That's just a fact of life. No one's going to stop you from saying your bigoted things, but likewise, no one is going to stop you from living and experiencing the social repercussions of your bigotry. And then the most fatuous of all the arguments that I saw came from Ben-Shapiro. Of course, I think I will do a video on this. Be sure to check it out later on today or tomorrow. But Ben-Shapiro is arguing that it's too high of a standard for universities. It's unrealistic for universities to go back into a child's history and use his past against him when they're considering acceptance into college. All right, so here's what Ben-Shapiro said. He said, quote, regardless of what you think about Kyle, and for the record, I think he, like many of the other Parkland survivors, has handled the public limelight with grace and strength. He went on to say, quote, Harvard's auto-da-fe sets up an insane, cruel standard no one can possibly meet. Auto-da-fe is a reference to the Inquisition. But so I'm not sure what standard Ben-Shapiro think is impossible to meet. Is it the standard that you probably shouldn't go on a racist tirade online? Is that the standard? Because that's not too hard. Or is it the standard that universities shouldn't look at a child's past? And I keep referring to this kid as a child. He's a man. Shouldn't look at a grown man's past. Because 16 years old, I mean, if you're a black kid, 16 is grown, because 12-year-old Tamir Rice was considered a grown man. So surely a 16-year-old white man has to be a man. But I digress. Is it the standard? Is it too high of a standard for a university to look at what a child or what a man does in high school, because he was 16 at the time. I mean, this is literally what universities do. They look at who you are and what you do in high school and use that as a determination of whether or not you get into the university. So I'm not sure, Ben Shapiro, where is the standard that is too insane to possibly be met by Kyle-kashuv, whatever. But of course, it's a special pleading. He has no problem doing it on behalf of Kyle because they are ideologically aligned. But too bad for Kyle. It's time to update his bio and take out Harvard University because he's not going there. I just want to say one quick thing about the Iranian potential conflict with Iran. And I'm going to keep it really brief because the bulk of this I've talked about with the patrons. So go to patreon.com for the whole 10-minute video on Iran. But I just really want to place the emphasis on how easily our media shifts into gear, into war mode. Not only our media, but our politicians. Not only our politicians and our media, but the population in general. It's fascinating to me. It's fascinating to me that an entire industry, an entire apparatus who generally thinks that Donald Trump is a moron that shouldn't be trusted to step foot into the White House, let alone be the commander-in-chief of the army, all of a sudden, they're playing their role when it comes to going to war with Iran. Now, I said on Twitter that I think that this is the perfect opportunity. This is the perfect opportunity for some Democrat, some enterprising Democrat who needs to stand out from the bunch to take a stand, a moral stand, but also a very calculated and intelligent political stand against war with Iran, not just for the sake of peace, but also politically against Donald Trump. Now, this isn't to say, I mean, there's obviously problems with that politically, because if you're just going to oppose this war because of Donald Trump, then does that mean that you're going to support it if there's another president in there? So they're going to have to answer those questions. They should take just a hard line stance against war. But it's just amazing to see that, you know, what is this? This is 2019. So 16 years after we got into war with Iraq, wrongfully, no weapons of mass destruction. I mean, I guess if you need to know how long does it take before America resets and is ready for another war, another unjust war, then I guess 16 years is about it. It takes about 16 years for us to forget that America has the ability to fake intelligence, to distort intelligence just ever so slightly enough to get us into war. That's all I'm going to say about that. Go to patreon.com/the BPD show. I've got some recommendations, and I think there's some things that we should be expecting out of our 2020 batch of candidates. If they want our vote, that is. Okay. One of the real reasons I wanted to make sure I got a podcast out today is because I'm getting pulled into another argument over on Twitter. And, you know, I guess this happens like once a year, and it's always around summertime. You have this resurgence of the idea, this renaissance of the idea, or the argument rather, between race and class and race. Is race first or class first? And as I said back in 2016, it literally should be. This is the only reasonable position to hold. It's both and neither to the detriment of the other. It's both race and class and neither to the detriment of the other. Now, for some of you who are new listeners, because I've got a whole bunch of new people who follow me and listen to me now, this is a question of what should be the primary push from the left. Should we be anti-racist first, or should we be anti-capitalist first? And then, of course, they hate this phrase. They I can't think of the names right now. I do know one of them is associated with Jacobin, but the other one used to host, I guess, with Chapo, Amiri, whatever her name is. It doesn't matter. The names are irrelevant right now. The ideas are what matters. They hate the word class reductionist, but we literally deal with class reductionism every single day. The idea that if we focus on class first and foremost, that it will, and then we usher in a socialist society, that we will de facto just automatically get rid of racism. Or if some people get a little more specific in their explanations, they will argue that the best anti-racist institutions are socialist institutions. And while there may be problems inside of those institutions, racist problems inside of those institutions, the institution itself and what the institution executes and does and accomplishes would be, by default, anti-racist. Nice, but that's not how history has played out. And so, yeah, I mean, as much as people hate to hear the word class reductionist, there literally are class reductionists on the left. People who we're ostensibly allies with. And some of the most heated arguments, scorched earth, dog eat dog arguments happen, within intra-politics, intra-party. And this is like intra-left. This is not even Democratic part. This is like the left. This is like I don't want to say a fringe argument, but it really is an argument of people with platforms who have the possibility and the potential of defining the direction of the leftist movement. So while it may seem like it's a niche argument and it's an edge argument and it's something that we probably shouldn't put a lot of energy in, the fact of the matter is, like, we are talking about people with platforms, with voices, who have the ability to set the general direction of the leftist movement in this country, or at least their voices are mixed into the competition for that direction, right? And that's meaningful. That actually matters. We have to talk about it. We actually have to talk about it. And one of the things that I always run into with my friends, with people who, we see the world the same way. Like we see the problem with, well, first of all, let me identify who I'm talking about. My friends like Wendy Muse, Noah Changa, various leftists with platforms, black leftists specifically, is that we exist in both spaces. We exist in the space where racism is extremely real. And that race problem is extremely real within progressive circles and leftist circles. I mean, in socialist and communist circles. And it was funny, I was reading The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual by Harold Cruz. And back in the Harlem Renaissance, they identified the same problem with leftist, socialist, communists. The same exact problem of prioritizing class over race and being indifferent to the plight of black people up until the point where it aligns with a class revolution, with the socialist and communist fight. So this is not a new problem by any measure. It's a well-documented problem that has been a problem for at least over a century. And so my friends and I, as we talk about this, and we have this public space, this public square of Twitter where we talk about this, we argue about this with other people, we are literally living in that space where we see the problem of racism, but then we also know very well the problem of race being used, or identity being used, as a means of protecting liberalism. And also now what's fascinating, we also are seeing now how identity is being used to protect conservatism. Hell, identity is being used to protect fascism. If you look at what Candace Owens is doing on behalf of Donald Trump and these neo-fascists that support him. Right? So identity obviously can be used as a weapon against a socialist movement. And no one is blind to that fact. In fact, I would argue that my crew, the Progressive Army, we were the ones who argued that point in 2016 so efficiently and so effectively and so succinctly that our arguments were co-opted by a lot of these people who are running their mouths now. A lot of them got the verbiage from us because we clearly identified how the establishment Democrats were using identity as a ploy to fight back against leftism and to fight back against any type of class specific policies. But just as soon as you see that happening on the left, and you see that happening rather in Democratic establishment circles, you have Donald Trump, who rises to power quite literally based on white identitarian politics, the fear of white genocide, the hatred and fear of Islam and Muslims, and the hatred and xenophobia, the hatred and fear of brown people and immigrants and asylum seekers, and the anti-social justice warrior, and the fear and the vilification of black people. I mean, he literally told police officers, Donald Trump literally told police officers to rough the thugs up. And so as we saw a problem and we effectively defined the problem, and we defined the problem so well, the problem of neoliberals and Democrats using identity politics as a way of protecting capitalism, I titled it The Weaponization of Identity Politics, right? There's plenty of research actually from like Adolph Reed and Noam Chomsky's daughter. Her name escapes me right now. Neoliberal multiculturalism. You know, there's plenty of actual research and study into that. But in terms of like the social media space, 2016, the terminology and effectively communicating the problem and identifying the problem. And it actually helped because we were black, right? It helped because we were black and we could call out black Democratic establishment who were playing identity politics games against Bernie Sanders. You know, oh, everybody loved us then. Oh my God, they loved us. Here's our black friends who can call out the Democrats for us. As effective as we were at doing that, and we did it because it was the right thing to do, you cannot ignore this renaissance of white supremacy, literal Nazis marching through our streets. You cannot downplay that, especially because the people who are targeted by it, the people who are literally being killed by them, are being killed and targeted specifically because of their identity. And so it became extremely necessary for us to fight both and neither to the detriment, both race and class and neither to the detriment. And I think what we're discovering, though, is just like this last wave, because the first wave of people who had a problem with identity politics, you know, a lot of them just jumped ship and went right on over to Donald Trump. A lot of people with platforms. I mentioned them. I think I mentioned them in a podcast. I don't know. Recently, I've mentioned them. It must be in a patron episode that I mentioned, the Cassandra Fairbanks of the world, the H.A. Goodmans of the world, the people who were so blown away by Bernie Sanders not winning that they went ahead and went full alt-right. Right. So the first wave, they left a long time ago. Then you had the second wave of people, and they still claim to be progressive. But I mean, it's painfully apparent that their desire to align and fight alongside the alt-right for the purposes of being anti-war, and then their willingness to sacrifice identity politics, And when we say identity politics, I want you to be clear. We're talking about people fighting for their lives, because their lives are under attack specifically because of their identity. Their lives, their freedoms, their progress, their liberties are literally being targeted because of their identities. And so that you know, there was an entire faction, I guess about 2 years ago now, 2 summers ago, when I first moved to Atlanta, of people were saying, oh, we should fight against war, and, you know, we set aside identity politics. And so, you know, they still claim to be progressive, but it's so clear now to everyone involved that they're not progressive. They're really like crypto fascists. You know, they have just this reactionary desire to work with the right wing, because that's where they really come from. Progressivism was just like a convenient cover for them. So that was like 2 years ago. Then last year, I forgot what happened last summer, but it's like every single summer you get this resurgence of ignorance from the left and their willingness to all out just say, you know, my identity, and of course they're going to have some token. There's always going to be a token person in there who's going to be like, my identity doesn't matter. I literally had somebody in my mentions today talking about everything, our lives were made better with the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act in 1964, 1965, and 1968. You know, our lives were made better. Our problems ended there. And this was a black person, ostensibly a black person saying it. So if that was a black person, it's just indicative of the fact that you're going to always have collaborators of color willing to sacrifice the real fight that exists in this country based on our identities. They're willing to sacrifice it to be in good standing with whoever. Like Candace Owens, she wants to be in good standing with conservatives. And of course you have some people on the left who want to be in good standing with the socialist bros. And here we are with the same argument over and over again. And I guess I should not be upset that we're in the same place again, because you can see as you read throughout history, this problem existed long before many of us were born. This is a problem of the left, and it is again. I just want to ready. This is a problem that the left has always had to deal with. And what's fascinating now is that there are those of us who actually have this thing figured out, and those of us who have the language and the vocabulary and the experience and the actual identity to deal with this problem efficiently, succinctly, and fairly. Both race and class. And we can mix, it's not just race, both identity and class, and neither to the detriment of the other. Like that's literally what it is. And what that means is, and I'll get back to my point. What that means is when people are under attack because of their identity, we fight for them based on their identity. When we see the establishment trying to fight against class consciousness and try to fight against policies that would help the working class around the world and in this country based on manipulating identity politics, then we fight that too. Like, you have to be ambidextrous in this fight. You have to be able to fight with both hands. You got to be able to switch gears. And I honestly, that's really the problem. There are a lot of people who are participating in this political commentary, social media space, who literally do not have the capacity to shift gears and fight multiple fights on different fronts. They have one set of vocabulary, one set of talking points, and they have very limited language, and so they do not challenge themselves to be able to fight on multiple fronts. But we literally have to be able to do that. We literally have to be able to fight against the Democratic establishment, who's now really, to a certain point, it looks like they're going to be okay with war with Iran, headed up by the commander-in-chief, Donald Trump. And we have to be able to fight that fight along with every other fight. We have to have the vocabulary and the flexibility to fight multiple fights. But the ironic thing about it is that there's an entire group of us who literally have this figured out because we had to figure it out, because this is where we exist. Our existence demanded that we understand how to fight against people who would manipulate identity politics for the purposes of protecting capitalism, as well as against people who attack us based on our identity. But you know what? We're not the people who get the jobs. We're not the people who get the promotions. We're not the people, because you know why? Because there's an entrenched, progressive, leftist, socialist establishment who like to fancy themselves as revolutionaries, but they are just as establishment as Democrats, except their talking points are socialist. And you don't want to shake up your institution any more than the Democrats want to shake up their institutions. And so obviously you're going to hire people, not who challenge you, but people who are going to literally just parrot the talking points that you want parroted. I do not see a difference. I do not see a difference in that way, in that specific way. I do not see a difference between there is, and I'll just call it what it is, the socialist establishment in this country, the bourgeois, it's hilarious because it's like a bourgeois socialist establishment in this country. Millionaires. They're millionaire socialists who are telling working class people of color to hush. It's about class. It's not about race. All right. That should be enough to start a whole bunch of arguments on Twitter in the podcast world. I'll talk about the rest later. See you guys next time.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.